Today's story is about the first resident who lived on Walt Disney World property. He was hired by Walt and worked closely with both of the Joes to be the resident who was here to kind of protect Disney's interests as things were getting developed. So where did he live? He lived actually kind of behind me. You can see the parking lot back there. That's actually the parking lot for the Hilton Hotel that's here on Buena Vista Drive. And he was actually living there. Now, also kind of in front of me, where I'm looking this way, is actually where the Orlando Air Park is that I've talked about before. So let's talk about that piece of history and how this person came to live here and who he was and a little bit more about him. Walt Disney came up with the idea for the experimental prototype community of tomorrow. The cool thing about this is the word experimental, where he was doing something that no one had ever really done before, save maybe a couple of company towns that sort of had the idea originally where people would live and work in a community, but they could only live there as long as they were members of the workforce. So while it didn't quite work out the way he intended it to, the state did offer him the ability to have the Special Improvement District, where they would have two cities set up, the city of Lake Buena Vista and the city of Bay Lake, where people would live and work. They are employees of the Walt Disney Company and live on property. The interesting thing is, this is not the first time this happened. There was another man by the name of Philip Smith. He was a graduate of the University of Miami Law School in the early 1960s. He had previously been in the military serving the Army, and now was actually looking for work. Now, he must have been connected in some way because he had two job offers. The first came to him from a law professor that he had who suggested he interview with someone in a law firm in Miami and talk to them about this mystery job that he knew nothing about. It just seemed like it would be an intriguing opportunity. That mystery job, the person he interviewed with was Paul Helliwell, the CIA operative who was working out of a law firm in Miami. He couldn't tell him anything about the job or what he was going to be doing, except that he was going to head up a legal department for a new company that was getting started in Florida. He declined the job and actually went to work for the Panama Canal Zone as a lawyer down there. Kind of interesting how he headed up a legal department somewhere else. Now, the intriguing connection here is that General Joe Potter, who had previously served in the Army, was the head of the Panama Canal Zone many years before this. So there's a sort of a parallel connected story here, because what happened was Joe Potter was living in Central Florida. He was living at a hotel like near Lake Eola, which is probably about 15 miles from the Walt Disney World property. So he was a little far away. And they realized they needed to have somebody on property who could actually protect the property, work the legal department, and take the angles that they needed to. And that's when they turned around again and offered the job again to Philip Smith. Now, this property was here and it was growing and there was a lot of interesting things happening, but no one lived there and no one was there. And honestly, at the time, there wasn't much going on in that part of the state. So this was sort of a remote area. If you kind of look at the picture, you get a sense of what it looked like. But Phil figured out it was Disney that was actually the company that was coming, and he finally leapt at the chance and said, you know what, I'll take the job, and wound up moving with his wife and his two small children to Central Florida to live on Walt Disney World property. The intriguing thing was that the Bronson family, who had sold them a large part of the northern part of the property, had an airstrip there that they called the Orlando Air Park, where they landed their small planes. They also had a house that was near that airstrip, and that's where Phil Smith wound up living for that period of time that he was there. About 2 years he was living there. And he was there to oversee the entire operation and kind of be the eyes and ears for Walt Disney as the things were being built at the Walt Disney World Resort. He also was the lead legal counsel who was involved with a lot of the different politics that were happening as they were writing the legislation and working on some of the legal questions and thorny issues. There are some stories about Walt Disney visiting the property before he passed away. And as you can see here, Walt did actually visit. That's the house in the corner there where the cars are parked. So he and Roy and Joe Potter and Joe Fowler and some other people that were associated with the construction project were visiting him at this house. And were actually there looking around and checking things out, which I find kind of intriguing in its own way. These pictures tell a story about that house and where they were and what they were doing. And I find the whole thing really kind of neat in its own way. Anyway, Walt Disney was here. He did visit. He had spent some time looking around the property before he died. And here he is on the terrazzo floor in front of the house as he's talking to other people. That's Bob Foster behind him, by the way. And there's some interesting kind of stories that go along with this. When you think about all the things that happened, Walt Disney came here, he visited, he stayed in that house, or at least visited the house, that Phil Smith was living in as the first resident. Now, of course, There were stories about Walt going out and visiting the property and kind of having a vision of what he wanted. Joe Fowler tells a great story about how he drove Walt around in a Jeep and talked to him about different things. And it was really pretty neat. So here's Walt and Bob Foster talking about the property. I imagine that Phil Smith is somewhere else. Maybe he's the one taking the pictures. Now, the interesting part is that Phil Smith actually was involved with writing the legislation that became the Reedy Creek Improvement District. Now, there's an oddity here that actually Paul Hellawell was responsible for that legislation, but Phil actually wrote a lot of the parts that had the legalese in them and the dotting the I's and the crossing the T's. Because he lived in the area, he could take care of some specific things that went along there. But it's kind of interesting how that plays out just because of the nature of their relationship. And how he wound up working for the Disney company instead of Paul Hellawell and his law firm, I really can't say. Anyway, to give you perspective on where the house was, it was actually located near where Reedy Creek Fire Station 4 is. You can see that there's the Hilton Orlando Resort that's on East Buena Vista Drive. And if we overlay the map that we saw before with the airstrip and the house, we can kind of get a sense of how it fits in here. Yes, the lake has changed shape a little bit, and there are some other things that have kind of changed a little, but generally speaking, you get the idea of where everything laid out. And I just think that's kind of neat, that you can actually go to that spot and see where it was. You can still see the airstrip up in the corner of the area where there's a little loop now. It's not really an airstrip. And if we remove everything else, we can see where the house was. It was basically on the corner of the parking lot where the Hilton Orlando is. So you can kind of get a sense of where it is. If you ever make it out that way, you can kind of drive by it and see where that original house was that he lived in. Now, Phil said he had a great adventure. He really enjoyed his time there. He and his kids and his wife would go off and they'd picnic in different places. They went over to Riles Island, shown here, which became Discovery Island. They went to different places around and kind of checked it all out. They were part of construction and they really got a feel for it. And it was kind of a really fun time. And he wound up heading up the legal department for many years after that, as he was part of the Walt Disney Company by then. Now, the house itself did get moved. It's not in that location anymore. Where it is, it's over by Environmental Services now. So they've moved it to a different part of the property, and you can see it here. It's actually located right on this area where the Smith house is, and you can see Walt's plane was also moved there from the back lot area. And this is what the house looks like today in that spot. So just an interesting backstory to someone who was the first resident of the Walt Disney World Resort and actually was employed by the company. Now, Phil does have a window on Main Street. He's part of the Fence Brothers, the D Fence Brothers, as you can see, and this is the rest of the legal team that worked with him.